I'm Chris Hahn, the Aggressive Progressive. Check out a new episode of the Aggressive Progressive podcast every Tuesday. You know, the election is heating up just as the year is winding down. Stick with me. I'll tell you the truth as I see it. Download the Aggressive Progressive on Pandora or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, in celebration of International Guitar Month, Pete Townsend of The Who will join us.
Pete went deep with us into his relationship with the guitar and with music in general, the new Broadway version of Tommy. He clarified the status and the future of The Who, and much, much more.
Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, what's up? It's your boy Joel Ortiz, and I want everybody to make sure that they subscribe and download the podcast, Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. Yo, Tim, I hope all is well. You my guy. I know these interviews are not interviews, they're actually conversations, and I appreciate them all. Yawa.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ice-T. I want you to do something for me. Make sure you download and subscribe Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. It is fucking official. All right? Stop playing. Download and subscribe. Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. It's cold.
That you was trying to get with me.
Yo, this is your man, Rahzel, the Godfather of Noise, beatbox king extraordinaire. Yeah.
There we go. This is Rahzel. Thank you so much for being on the Library with Tim Einenkel and allhiphop.com. Thanks for joining me again, man.
Yeah.
Cool. So I want to start from your early beginnings. You grew up in Queens. So what kind of started you beatboxing, and when did you kind of first hear it on wax and kind of inspired you to pursue it?
I mean, actually, music always been a thing in urban communities, you know. But like my early days, you know, my big influences were like the DJs that would play in my neighborhood. You know, I grew up in Queens, and you know, we've had DJs from Brooklyn as well come through and rock in the parks. But my earlier introduction to the beatbox was on cassette. It wasn't even on vinyl yet.
Oh, nice.
It was on tape by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. So that was my first introduction to the beatbox. And, you know, those tapes, you know, for me kind of went platinum in the hood, so to speak. And that was my basic introduction, and it just exploded. And I mean, I think at that point, everybody wanted to be or sound like, you know, Grandmaster Flash, because that was like the new thing that was popular. And, you know, as a kid, we would form groups, you know, different groups, you know, write our rhymes or whatever. And somebody had to do the beatbox. So I was designated beatboxer. So they did to the task. I mean, I did a pretty good rendition of it. I think what kind of like motivated me to get into it more than the rhyming part, because I mean, with two things. Actually, a guy that actually moved from Brooklyn to Queens, because back then, you know, a lot of the city jobs and airport jobs, families from Brooklyn were moving to Queens to get, you know, a better living situation. Mm-hmm. And a guy that moved from Brooklyn, his name was Monroe. He was like, I know somebody that can do the beatbox better than you. So I'm like, really? Let me hear it. So he popped in the cassette tape, and it was this group called the Disco 3. And there's a dude on the beatbox called Grandmaster Doc Nice. And I'm like, oh, yo. And that kind of like just spun my head around a little bit. But turned out the Disco 3 was the Fat Boys.
Wow.
Disco 3 was the Fat Boys. And Grandmaster Doc Nice was Buffy. And that just started, I mean, from that point, that started my journey to get better, you know, because he definitely was good. And this was probably back 1980. 1980 when I heard Buffy. And in 81 is when I actually started to like go to the studio, like getting introduced to the studio and, you know, writing more lyrics and stuff like that. I was introduced to Paul C. McCasty back in 81, late 81, 82. And, you know, and introducing himself, actually me introducing myself to him, he was like, listen, let me hear what you got, because I heard you can do, you know, a pretty good beatbox impersonation. So I didn't know if to take that personal or not, but so I did the beatbox. He was like, oh, you know, you sound like the Machine. Like, oh, that's crazy. You know, just telling him my aspiration. I wanted to make records. So he's like, yo. So we would play around with some stuff. And he was like, okay, I think you sound different from everybody else. Around this time, this is when like Fat Boys was making records, like, and Dougie Fresh was popular. Like, this is all street stuff. This is before it even touched records. You know what I mean? So he's like, you sound different from them dudes. So he gave me a task. He's like, he introduced me to since I sound like the actual Machine, he started introducing me to other machines like the Lindrum, like the TR-808, the 909, the 707, the SP-12. He started introducing me to other drums. So he used to make beats and give me the beats on cassette, and I go home and kind of just like, you know, rehearse these beats. And he used to have them all broken down, like snare, kick drum, bass drum, hi-hat, cymbals. Like, he would have it all broken down for me. What he also did, I mean, back then, digging was popular because, you know, with the DJ, especially with Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, you know, Grand Wizard Theodore. I mean, it's a whole bunch of DJs that, you know, when they came to the park, they would play these records, but they would scratch out who the artist was and the name of the record because they wanted to have these rare grooves and these rare breaks before anyone. And they didn't want people to come, you know, like now it's a free fall. Like, people can just come download your stuff and, you know, all of a sudden you're a great DJ. Back then, you had to really put in the work to be a great DJ and have like rare records that no one had. I mean, I think Africa Bambaataa was probably one of the top dudes because he had records from all over the world. So, but with the vocal thing, Paul C kind of introduced me to like, for him, I reminded him of certain people and certain rhythms. So he introduced me to Kraftwerk, like groups like Kraftwerk. He introduced me to Al Jarreau, like introduced me to Bobby McFerrin, like early Bobby McFerrin, 1982, his first album, and then the Voice album. So he kind of like guided me and steered my path, like on different stuff to focus on. And you know, that just lit the fuel. That's pretty much what lit the fuel for me. I mean, you can go do the research on this acapella and vocals, and you can track it back to these guys where They were phenomenal. They were in the jazz genre,
Right.
but it still had the funky rhythm to it, you know? And also with the records that he was suggesting that I kind of imitate or kind of follow like drum patterns, he gave me a whole lot of records that I would listen to as well that had drum patterns on it. You know what I'm saying? From James Brown. I mean, it's a list, you know, Art Blakey, like he gave me homework. Like, he gave me homework. He's also the guy that was responsible for me actually keeping my real name instead of coming up with a fictitious name. So that was kind of like my early journey, like in the beginning stages of the beatbox. You know, a lot of people try to claim like they created the beatbox or whatever, but it goes a little bit further back than that. And even with the first rap record, it goes a little bit further back than that. Once again, Raising Queens, everybody knows about the Fatback Band, King the Third. You know, I mean, we can go on and on about, you know, conspiracies and, you know, who planted the flag first. But like just on the underground level, man, you know, it was brewing. The Fat Boys, you know, they got signed to a record deal. Dougie Fresh started making records. Bismarck, you know, he got with Marley Marl. He started making records. But around that time, you know, I moved around a lot because, you know, I was in foster care. So I moved around a lot. So that kind of hindered me actually being in one place and being able to focus on actually recording. But nonetheless, that never stopped me from honing in on the craft. So I was kind of like a mad scientist when it came to honing the craft of beatboxing. So with all those tools, you know, in my neighborhood, I hooked up with a couple of other producers. A guy named Raymond Romaine. You know, he was another not evil genius, but he's another genius.
Right.
When it came to production, like him and Paul C, like the guy Raymond Romaine, we were doing things back in 81 and 82 that's relevant right now in 2020. Like we was engaged with man versus machine. Like we was intertwining those things. And I still have cassette tapes with music that we've produced together from his crib back then. And you can listen to it right now and it's like, holy shit. So you did this back in like 81? It sounds like today what the kids are doing today. So, you know, for me, man, it's like I feel that I've always been like ahead of my time, like decades. Like stuff that I was doing back then was kind of over everybody's head because I don't think they was kind of ready to merge the two together. Mm-hmm. Understand what I'm saying? I don't think they were ready. So, you know, for me, I had to dumb it down a little bit. I had to take the route. I don't want to say dumb it down, but to me, it was over people's heads because it sounded, people were like, is that really you?
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, that's me. It's like, it sounds like a real drum machine. Like, how are people going to be able to tell if it's you or if it's a machine? So that's always been well, back then that was it was kind of like the hurdle I had to get over because it sounded so real that people, if you played a track, people would think it was like a track with a drum machine and, you know, somebody, you know, playing the instrument on top of it. They wouldn't think it's an actual human being. Where, you know, I think like guys like Bobby McFerrin and Al Jarreau, where they did use jazz because people were used to instruments and jazz. So that's why they were able to pull it off a little bit better, right. You know? So with hip hop, it was a little bit different because, you know, we did use heavy drum machines or heavy samples. And, you know, me actually sounding like a drum machine, people didn't get it because they were like, okay, what is he doing? They were like, no, that's him. And, you know, this kind of confused people. So, that's when I said, you know what? Let me just start writing, being an MC. Let me start focusing on the MC part now. So I put out my first record in 1983 with a group that's kind of like paying a homage to my own cousin Raheem from the Furious Five. We were the Ever Loving Five, and that was my first record rapping. I wanted to beatbox on it, but the guy that was producing the song, he was like, "No, we don't want to produce a beatbox record or have a beatbox on the record." So did the record anyway. It got played on the radio. I mean, it really didn't do nothing, but to me, it was like my introduction to this hip hop. Like, yo, I'm on the radio, man. Look, I made it. So
I actually want to ask you. You talked about Bobby McFerrin and other kind of musicians that have inspired you or re-inspired you to do this craft. But one person,
Take Six, like crazy.
One person that stands out when I was kind of reading up on you, and you talked about there's a point I think in your career where you kind of wanted to withdraw from beatboxing because you said it sounded monotonous. But you talk about the actor Michael Winslow art.
No, I knew about Michael Winslow in the 80s because he was an actor, and people always talked about the guy that can do all the incredible sounds with his mouth. And I mean, even as a kid, I was kind of intrigued by, Disney and Warner Brothers, and, all of those things played a part in my development, and to actually see somebody that was, using that vocal ability to create a soundscape, was amazing to me. So, that was a part of my blueprint as well. This, taking some pages out of Michael Winslow's book. So we were talking in the 80s. Michael Winslow in the 80s.
You also mentioned, you obviously have worked with a ton of great producers, and when I was going through your discography, a producer that really stands out is Bob Power. He helped co-write and produce To the Beat and Steal My Soul. What is it like working with Bob, but also how does someone like him kind of help you elevate your music, but also your studio work?
I mean, to me, I think gravitating towards, great producers because they're able to get the best out of me. They're able to at the time he was able to kind of stretch my ability, and, he's like, yo, this be creative. I mean, in some situations, you're producing a record, and, some producers don't really give you that free range. I can also say, like, when I work with Bjork, it was kind of like working with Bob Powers. It was kind of like, be yourself, like all the things that you create in your own spare time. That's what I want to get out of you. So, working with Bob, he just kind of, and he understood like jazz, he understood those things. So, it was like, okay, we're gonna fuse the two together. We're gonna do the Al Jarreau, we're gonna do the Al Jarreau / hip hop / Tribe Called Quest. Like we're gonna do that type of vibe. So, and I mean, and that's when we came up with them two songs, Steal My Soul and To the Beat with Q-Tip. You know what I mean?
Raz, I'm gonna be probably all over the place, but I actually do kind of want to go back to what you were talking about with all the quote unquote homework that you were given in your early on in your career. Were these records that you were listening to, were these machines that you were hearing, was it challenging for you to recreate them? Or, I mean, how much work did you yourself feel that you had to put into them? And when did you know that you kind of perfected them?
I mean, to me, it was just a constant listening session. It's a constant listening session, and he would play stuff for me. Another note I wanna put out: he would play stuff, record it, put it on cassette, give it to me to take home. I would listen to the stuff. I would try to, do my best to emulate the exact frequency of what that particular track was. Everything is dependent on your anatomy. So, I mean, it was definitely a huge test for me and a learning experience at the same time, because the stuff that I was learning, I didn't know I was learning it. He just gave me the work and like, yo, next time I see you, I want to see if you can get this down. So here go these records. Next time I see you, I want to see if you can do this riff that Al Jarreau was doing on take 5. Let me see, let me see if you can do that. Like, so he was just give me this homework all the time, and I would come back and I do my best rendition. But what happened in that process, I developed my own techniques. I developed my own style listening to those tapes. So it wasn't the point to get it exact spot on. I think what he was trying to accomplish is to get me to think differently and get me to create my own style, because I think at the time, I know for a fact at the time, like everybody mimics everybody. It's like beatboxing today. Everybody mimic each other. What he was trying to do, I didn't know at the time, but as time went on, I kind of figured out that's what he was trying to do. What he was trying to do was to keep me from mimicking everyone else and making records like everyone else. Because at a certain point, all the records, everybody was making the same record or trying to compete and try to, outdo the next person, but not sounding different.
All right.
You know what I'm saying? So to me, and it worked out for me in the long run, because it allowed me to think outside the box, no pun intended. It allowed me to actually grow. It allowed me to actually like be committed. Like, you can't sound like everyone else. You got to be different. And what's going to make you different from everyone else? So during that time, I'm like, okay, well, how can I be a different MC than everyone else? Okay, an MC that can beatbox, an MC that can do sound effects, an MC that can produce, can produce his own tracks with his own vocals. So that's what came out of all of that homework.
Right.
That he was giving me.
How does the homework and your prep? I just want to take you to take us to a live show. I mean, I saw you prior to the interview recording. I saw you years ago at Brooklyn Bowl with Pete Rock, and obviously and watched you many times on YouTube, and your live show is impeccable. Especially because I have no idea how you do any of the things you do, but it's incredible to watch. How do you take the homework that you start out with and transition it to not just the studio time and making records or music, but also to the live show? Were you also trying to see these people live as well, or was the records helpful enough to allow you to kind of create your own live show?
That was a whole different school. Now I learned about live performance and recording, once I joined the Roots. That was Roots University. So we talking live performance and recording, two different animals.
Right.
Two different frequencies that you have to deal with. Where in the studio, you're able to dig a little deeper because you're able to pick up frequencies that you can't hear once it disperses. Like when you perform live, you're talking about it disperses. Like those frequencies start to travel. Where when you're in the studio, you can harness it right away before it expands. Once it starts to expand, it dissipates. Those frequencies dissipate, so you don't get the same, you don't get the same attack, you don't get the same movement with those frequencies when you're performing live. Now, a good sound engineer can help mobilize those frequencies. But sometimes, I mean, that's always a battle because with every venue, with every arena, every place you go, the sounds, they vary because depending on the sound, the size of the venue, depending on the acoustics, like, you know, to me, that was a whole nother school. That was a whole nother school for me because now I'm learning about, now I'm live with what I'm doing in the studio. In the studio, I can chop it up and you can hear the little live, that little dissipates in seconds. And somebody that's in the back row, in the back of the club, they can't hear that. They can't hear that what they heard on the record. So, you know, learning about that between what's live and what's recorded, I learned that, you know, being with the Roots. So that was a whole nother school. That was like what I learned about the studio was and records and listening. That was a school of Paul C. You know what I'm saying? Paul C and Ray Romaine. Like those guys is like, yo, the kick, let's get it down. You know, the Roots is like, yo, this is live and we're going to take the live and we're going to go to the studio. So, you know, it was two different things that was going on, two different schools.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, I'm Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, in celebration of International Guitar Month, Pete Townsend of The Who will join us.
Pete went deep with us into his relationship with the guitar and with music in general, the new Broadway version of Tommy. He clarified the status and the future of The Who, and much, much more.
Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.